Everybody Hates Rand is a Wheel of Time podcast that will contain spoilers for all 14 books. So if you're anti-spoiler, stop this, read all 14 books, and come back. We'll be here, waiting.
Our title is a joke and is meant to be taken as such. Everybody in this context refers to us and our cats. You are free to feel however you want about Rand. He's a fictional character. Please don't DM us.
The world is a mess, Dark One stretching out his hand. The dragon's reborn, the fire's been fanned, but everybody hates Rand. Everybody hates Rand. Everybody hates Rand.
Whoa.
I'm sick of the snow in real life.
Yeah.
And I'm sick of Winter's Heart in Winter's Heart. I've had enough of this book.
That was Inception. You Winter's Inception.
I Winterceptioned it.
Winterception's heart.
This is going to be a fun
Most
episode.
stupid possible. You're right, this is going to be a great episode. What am I saying? Hey. This is Everybody Hates Rand, your friendly neighborhood Wheel of Time podcast. I'm Emily Jushaw.
I am Sally Gudger.
And the good news, guys, is that we're with Matt, my beloved. He's so pleasant.
Pleasant, this book.
He is
Crossroads
pleasant in
of
this
Twilight,
book.
Matt is
On thin ice.
thin ice.
And
then
once
he
Brandon Sanderson gets a hold of him, forget about it.
just drops right through the ice.
Yeah, just goodbye. Goodbye, my youngster. I don't know what I'm saying.
Goodbye, my youngster.
Goodbye, my youngster.
But we are back with Matt, and after
After a book-long absence, a book and a half long absence, we are halfway through
Yeah.
Winter's Heart. And I guess we should really only say half a book's absence because, as famously you may recall, we have not covered Path of Daggers. But I know it's there, so I still feel it. you
Yeah.
know, his absence.
yes,
Um,
after a book and a half, it is very nice to be back in Matt's head.
yes.
He's a very refreshing narrator, as we've talked about.
He is just so spazzy. I mean, you'll be reading him and you'll be like, God, it's annoying how much how much Robert Jordan is like, wow, Matt gets distracted by women all the time and whether they're pretty or what their boobs look like or whatever. But then you'll be reading and you'll be like, Matt also gets distracted by horses and shiny things, so...
So those are his 3 magpie obsessions.
Yeah, it's really just, he might have ADHD.
It's boobs, horses, shiny thing. And I mean, I can relate.
Yeah.
A boobs, horses, shiny things?
I too. It's like, you know, when you're driving along any road, a country road,
Yeah.
and anytime you see horses, you're like obligated to say, look, horses.
Yeah, of course.
It's like if you're obligated, when you see nice boobs, you have to be like, look at those.
Look at them.
Look at those.
What are those?
What are those? And I pretty much point out shiny things too whenever I see them, so.
I mean, I love shiny things.
Yeah, Matt is just pretty relatable, actually.
Yeah. You actually should not, while
Yeah,
you're on
don't
the street,
ever
point
do
at
that,
a woman and be
actually.
like, look at those boobs.
Maybe if she's like a very close friend and it's an inside joke.
Yeah. Yeah. But
But do not actually.
I just want you to know we are not condoning that behavior.
Yeah, no, don't catcall. Matt does things in the privacy of his own head.
Which is totally fine.
Yeah, go
If you see
ahead,
someone
little
with
guy.
lovely breasts, you can be like, those are lovely, in the safety of your own head.
Yeah, that's your space. And God's space. Did you know for my entire childhood I was afraid God could read my mind?
Me too! I have a very vivid memory of playing with Barbies in the Barbie, dollhouse my mom got me with the neighbor girl. And I had this, I was 6. I had this, existential crisis being like, I'm playing God to these Barbies, right? And I was like, oh my God, Alicia, do you think God can read our mind? And she's like, no, you freak. And I'm like, no, I'm convinced that he can.
Yours is so much more profound than mine. I just was like, I can't masturbate because that I'm thinking sexy thoughts. So
Well, the church probably told you that.
I don't remember if the church said that Jesus can read my mind, but it certainly didn't say he couldn't read my mind, so...
Left it up to interpretation.
Yeah, left it up to interpretation. There's also some troubling things about just, like, the dead can visit us at any time.
That's horrifying.
You know, so, like, your dead grandma could be there. Another reason not to masturbate.
Yeah, that's a real mood killer. We open with Matt in Eludra's firework wagon.
Yeah, where we have returned to Valan Luca's circus.
It's the return of the king.
The return of the king!
Valan Luca is back, baby.
Only he's been domesticated like a sitcom husband by a nagging wife.
Yeah.
You know, Valan Luca was never interested in getting married, but I guess a woman finally nagged him into it.
Yeah, and Matt takes every opportunity while in Valan Luca's circus to remind us how wretched Valan Luca's wife is. This will be like a running.
Is that because she's such a shrew or whatever?
Yeah, she's just so mean.
It's like, well, I kind of would be too if I was married to
Valan Luca. Yeah, he's a nightmare.
Matt is in Eludra's tent. It always takes me a little while, and luckily Matt reminds us of the fact, but I was like, how do they know each other? They know each other? Like, it's just so weird, you know?
Yeah, it's a weird connection.
But Matt and Eludra met very briefly along with Tom in book 3, the best book, when Eludra walked into a barn that Matt and Tom were sleeping in and was chased by some other Illuminators who were out to kill her because they blamed her for the explosion that happened in Ilion that was actually Rand's fault. Yes, this is a real plot. And Matt and Tom rescued her. So she gave them some fireworks, and Matt used those fireworks to blow a hole in the Stone of Tyr.
Yeah, so it really just comes full circle. Not really. Ilion and Tyr are different.
Yeah. But Matt tells us that he has been working on Eludra for the last few days, and we're not quite sure what that means yet, except he does sort of give us these little hints about how he is like, Eludra, I imagine that you could make explosives. Like, I've seen you use night flowers, which are what they call fireworks, and they come out of this tube, and you say they can go up to 300 yards, but I imagine if you put them on their sides, they'd be able to go a lot further than that. And da-da-da-da-da, he's like, I think, you know, you wouldn't be able to take back Ebou Dar except with Ashaman, or maybe with Eludra's night flowers. So it's very clear that he has some destructive weapon in mind. And Eludra clearly has also had this thought. She's, like, working at it with a mortar and pestle at something while they're talking. And,
yeah, and Eludra is, I think some relevant background to this is that Matt tells Eludra that basically, well, to his knowledge, all of the other Illuminators have been killed by the Seanchan.
Killed or are not out and about like Eludra is.
Yeah, so there's been a sort of ethnic cleansing of them.
Yes.
Perhaps not as intentional as that, but Matt is like, you are basically the only Illuminator that I know of anymore. So there's some, like, and we know that historically the Illuminators Guild has always been very close-chested, and I think the fact that there are no other Illuminators to be seen, maybe they are out there but in hiding, makes Eludra kind of like the only Illuminator left. So of course she's going to continue to guard those secrets. This makes sense to me, but she's very hesitant to give Matt the secrets to her fireworks. And so she gives him a riddle, which is very, like, classically, it's very funny, but it's also, I think, pretty in line with Matt's archetypes and mythology to, like, have to solve a riddle in order to get something that you need.
Yes, it's very tropey.
Yeah.
Riddles are something that, like, you speak in riddles to dragons. Riddles bring to mind, like, Rumpelstiltskin or something. They are usually, like, one half of a bargain between a trickster figure, which is Matt, and some kind of, like, princess, which kind of reminds one of Eludra, who does not have the ability to spin straw into gold, but can make literal explosions out of black powder, which is arguably much more interesting.
Yeah, and I definitely think there's, like, a princessy aspect, like a lost princessy aspect to her being, like, separated from her people. So it very much plays in line with all of these tropes, definitely.
Yeah, I find Eludra to be one of the more interesting characters in this series.
I agree 100%.
She's one of those characters who I'm like, I could really, like, at this point, I don't need any more points of view, but if Robert Jordan had been a little more economic with his points of view, then I would have appreciated one from Aludra, because you're right, she's in a very unique position as the last, as far as we know, surviving Illuminator.
Yeah, the last Illuminator.
And her, like, the fact that she's part of a circus, and now she's hanging out with Matt, it's just very interesting.
Yeah, and she's got living in this circus under, like, an occupation. It's all very, very interesting. I wish Matt and Aludra did not have little makeout sessions in the wagon, the way they do in a couple of chapters.
Relationship.
Yeah, that's a better way to say it. Obviously, it's probably not just kissing, though it would be fine if it was.
Yeah, maybe it is. Who knows?
I don't know. It kind of cheapens their relationship to me.
Yeah, it's always nice when Matt has relationships with, not Matt specifically. It is always nice to have platonic male and female relationships, but Matt specifically, you know, has like a history of them somewhat with Brigitte, and as he, and, you know, with various Aes Sedai, people like that. Matt tends to have stronger platonic relationships with women than some of the other guys do.
Yeah.
But yeah, Valan Luca's circus is camped outside of Ebou Dar. It's the middle of winter in the middle of the Seanchan occupation. And I find this to be a really interesting setup. I do not at all enjoy the Seanchan, you know, conceptually or as characters. But I find Matt's perspective as it is interacting with other characters' perspectives on, like, this occupation and what that means for them and what they can do about it to be really interesting. Matt is, as is in line with his character, very pragmatic about the whole thing.
Yeah.
And a little bit fatalistic about it. He's got this military mindset of, like, well, you guys, through no real fault of your own, I mean, just Ebou Dar wasn't equipped to turn aside this invasion, but now they're here and you can't get rid of them, because that's how occupations work, really. It's going to take more manpower than you guys have.
Yep.
And he's also like, if you do anything to rebel against the Seanchan, then you are just going to get killed. They are now the military and law enforcement authorities within the city. Like, you don't have any power. Notably, when they are returning to the city from Valan Luca's circus, there are, like, people's heads. I don't know if they're on spikes or something, but, like, gross stuff outside of the walls as, like, here are criminals. And Matt notes that there are Seanchan heads among them, so they are not just persecuting. Not persecuting isn't the right word. They are not just condemning the invading. They are not just condemning the native inhabitants of the place that they are invading. That is obviously not an excuse, it's just something Matt notes. But amongst those heads are the former mistress of the ships from the Sea Folk and her master of the swords, which I guess those were just kind of like the two people who were in charge. And their supposed crime was rebellion.
Yep.
Or fighting back against the Seanchan. And speaking of ethnic cleansings, there has been some real, like, damage done to the Sea Folk. We don't really get that in these chapters specifically, but we'll get it a little bit more as Matt starts interacting with, like, he'll start going into the quarters where the Daman are kept and seeing a lot of Sea Folk women there. Stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Matt is, I also don't enjoy the Seanchan occupation. But when how do I want to say this? It is an interesting setup when seen through Matt's point of view. I don't think I would enjoy this if it was through another character's point of view. Matt, as we've talked about at length, is our most fluid and adaptable character. So, of course, like Emily said, he's approaching this with a pragmatism about what you can do and what you can't do. And I think it offers a very interesting counter-narrative to the typical narrative we see when, especially in, like, fantasy or high adventure novels, when you are faced with an invading regime and an occupation. Of course, the most often our main character is slid into the, like, resistance leader / freedom fighter
which
role.
Is where Beslin and Tom, as we'll talk a little bit more about, are currently.
Yes. And I just think Matt's relationship to it, again, is an interesting counter-narrative because I think it is more authentic. Obviously, resistance to invading forces and regimes, authoritarian regimes, fascist regimes, are incredibly crucial, and many horrors that have happened in our world would not have stopped without the efforts of those everyday people on the ground resisting. But it's also, I think, too simplistic to say that that is something that is available to everyone under an occupation. There is a lot more threat to various people depending on what identity you are occupying. For instance, it's a lot more dangerous for the sea folk to rebel because they're just going to take all the women who can channel and then enslave them. And not saying there's a right choice, but like if the sea folk maybe had like laid a little bit lower, those women might have flown under the radar perhaps. So there's different levels of harm presented based on what role you occupy in society, especially under an occupation. So again, too simplistic to say that you shouldn't resist, obviously, but too simplistic to say that it's just like everyone can and should be a freedom fighter despite the price you would pay and the price your loved ones would pay. So yeah, Matt just offers such an interesting like counter perspective to what I think Rand or Perrin or Egg or even Nynaeve and Elaine would be doing in the same situation.
Yeah, I think Matt's stance on this wouldn't work unless we didn't know that pretty much literally every other character would take a high moral approach to this situation in wanting to be part of a resistance. And B, I don't think it would work unless Matt was in contrast to characters who are actively planning a resistance. We have sort of Beslin and Tom keep like talking and having these like hushed conversations. Beslin, obviously being the prince of this country, feels that he has a responsibility to fight back against the invaders, which like good for Beslin.
Yeah.
And Tom, as a person with vast experience in overthrowing political regimes,
Killed two kings,
Maryland. Is probably pretty well equipped to handle it.
Yeah.
Plus, he can't resist meddling in politics.
Yes.
And Matt accurately, the paragraph where he realizes what they're talking about is very good because clearly they haven't really considered that he would be on to them. And he's just like, could you guys not? You're gonna end up getting murdered.
Yeah.
And they're like, whatever do you mean, Matt?
What could you be talking about?
And he's like, you're gonna get me murdered too.
Yeah. And that's what's most important.
But yeah, if like everyone was just totally indifferent to this, then that would be totally wild and historically out of character, I think.
Yeah.
And Matt himself isn't even indifferent.
Yes.
Matt isn't like, oh, just let this happen. He's just like, realistically, there is nothing that can be done. And notably, when Matt does have the means and the necessity to start fighting back against the Seanchan in the next few books, he does. He mounts quite a guerrilla counterattack against the Seanchan in Altara.
Yeah, and especially Matt is not just sitting passively. He's actively trying to figure out how to make cannons so that they can fight back against the Seanchan, who have just ridiculous amounts of firepower because they're willing to weaponize women who can channel in a very cruel way. So, yeah, Matt is also not sitting by passively. He's just sort of biding his time, which is a very classic Matt thing. Knows when to make his move. Yeah, it's just very interesting. And I was thinking, this just happens to be convenient timing. An interesting book to pair with these chapters would be Phoenix Extravagant by Yoon-Ha Lee, which I'm currently reading. In full disclosure, I'm almost finished. I haven't finished it yet. I have like 50 pages left. But this is a book that deals with, the main character lives in a country that has been invaded, conquered, and occupied by an invading force from a different country. So it is looking at issues of collaborating, so collaborators with the occupation, of resistance, of what it means to navigate those difficult decisions in order to survive, and how are you protecting your culture and your people. Also deals with weapons of mass destruction, the way that cannons could be classified in this world. They are the most destructive thing besides channeling that I believe we see. So just a lot of similar themes dealt with in a more intentional way. I don't think Robert Jordan is making, of course, intentional decisions, but that's like the full focus of the book. So of course it is just like more intentional because that's what we're dealing with, not this inside of a whole apocalypse narrative. So yeah. I just wanted to offer that up if you find these themes interesting.
Cool. I need to read that.
It's been very good so far.
Yeah, this whole occupation is backdrop for Matt's current, like, A plot.
Yep.
Which is the fact that he is still in Ebou Dar under Tylan's control. And obviously there's a comparative metaphor there. Matt is under Tylan's control, and this entire country is under Seanchan control.
Yes.
And it's a pretty, I think, accurate metaphor in some ways, at least the way Robert Jordan has written it. I'm not going to use this to comment on occupations, period.
Yeah.
But Robert Jordan's sort of lenient stance toward occupations by efficient empires and how people are just willing to sort of, like, submit and see the good in them is really reminiscent of how Matt has these really mixed feelings toward Tylan. Matt obviously does not appreciate not having any power in the relationship, but he does appreciate some things about the relationship. He enjoys having sex. He thinks Tylan is, he has mixed feelings about Tylan herself, you know. I'm saying that entirely from Robert Jordan's perspective.
Sorry, it's just hard for me to get in Robert Jordan's head because I hate that woman so much.
Yeah, we wouldn't necessarily classify this as having sex. We would classify it as rape. But the way Robert Jordan has written it is that their relationship is a gray area rather than a black and white, good or bad. So, sort of an interesting thing there, and that ties back into how Matt's reigning narrative here is that he wants to get out of Ebou Dar and away from Tylan. And he is facing some rather insurmountable challenges in that quest.
Yes.
For one thing, up until this point, he has not been mobile at all.
Yes.
One thing we're dealing with here is Matt recuperating from injuries that he sustained at the end of Crown of Swords. We're told that he broke a leg and some ribs, as well as the sort of superficial, using medical speech, damage that the rest of his body took.
Like soft tissue damage.
Yeah.
Because a building fell on him.
Yeah. And we're pretty used in Wheel of Time, and in a lot of fantasy texts, I think, to having injuries magically healed.
Yes.
So it is also interesting to have Matt be dealing with an injury that was not magically healed.
Yeah, I think about this and I actually get so upset that he doesn't have a point of view in Path of Daggers because it feels like the purpose of that was to be like, Matt was on bed rest, so what could he possibly have said
or done
to contribute to the narrative? And it's like, that is such an ableist decision, Robert, because just because you're on bed rest does not mean you are not an active contributor in the world around you. It also, like, Matt could still be commenting on what's happening with the Seanchan, which is actually vital information. So, like, regardless of whether or not, whatever, it's just such a weird decision to me. But it also could just really be so interesting, and because Matt notes that Tylan started assaulting him before he was off bed rest. Like, she was taking full advantage of the fact that he was not mobile to get rid of all of his clothes and replace it with clothes that she wants him to wear, to continue to assault him and to just exercise absolute complete control over him, which is something that many disabled people are unfortunately faced with when they have to have a caregiver. Like, that's a situation that is rife with abuse. Anyway, it's just like, it makes me so frustrated because, yes, Matt does not have access to magical healing the way people do when they're just literally being, like, almost decapitated in other situations. So, sorry, continue.
No, I just think, where we're at now, I find it interesting to deal with a point of view character who is still dealing with major, body challenges.
Yeah.
Matt comments constantly on how walking is a struggle. You know, he'll be, like, sitting for a long time and he's already thinking, oh, it's gonna be such a pain to get up and start walking to get the kinks out. And then once he says, we walked enough to get the ache out of my leg and then put it back, you know, stuff like that. So he is, he's mobile now, but he is dealing with chronic pain, I think we would say.
Yeah, which is very fascinating, very interesting.
Yeah, and I don't know, in Crossroads of Twilight, is he still dealing with it?
I think he comments on it a bit at the beginning. But it sort of his commentary on it starts to fade out and is replaced with his obsession with Tuon, so.
Unfortunate. It's just, I guess it's just notable because it's so rare in this series.
Yeah.
And I, as a big advocate of the verisimilitude of injuries,
of course,
really appreciate it, as I appreciate it whenever it appears in other fantasy texts where magical healing is an option, but for whatever reason we need to deal with the actual timeline of an actual body.
Yeah, it's, in a way, it's just very refreshing because, like, it's so easy for magical healing to drift into disease and disability just don't exist in this universe, which is very uncomfortable. Like, I am a sick and disabled person, so this is something that I notice a lot, so not going to apologize for commenting on it, but that's probably why I do so. But it also just, like, feels icky to just be like, nobody is ever going to be sick.
Yeah.
Except for Matt.
So Matt is dealing with that as a major hurdle to overcome in his escape.
I know.
Yeah, like among that, he says he doesn't think he can sit in a saddle for long periods of time. Plus, of course, there's the fact that Tylan won't let him go anywhere. He has commented on, like, he at some point tried to just get on a ship to get out of the city, and Tylan just had him, like, dragged back to the palace. And there's also sort of, this hasn't been explicitly stated, but it is implicit that Matt has a lot of people here in Ebou Dar with him, who he also has to get out.
Yeah.
Presumably Matt himself, as a very slippery, lucky character, might be able to maneuver a situation where he himself could get out, but he has a ton of people that he feels responsible for. And that number is only going to increase. And what's interesting about that, mostly in this storyline, is that although that number of people he's responsible for increases, the number of people that he can rely on also increases.
Yeah.
His collaboration with, like, Egeanan and Bael'Damon, for example, is pretty interesting because they become, like, partners, in a sense, in this escape. So there's a little bit of that, like, community over individualism.
Yeah.
But Valan Luca's circus is right now their main plan to get out of the city. And Tom is like, yeah, he'll take us on at exorbitant rates, but he's not planning on leaving till spring. And Matt's like, dang it. Although probably Matt could do with more time to prepare.
Yeah.
Although one understands his very urgent desire to get out of the city.
Yeah.
So plot-wise, this is just Matt, Tom, and Beslin are out visiting the circus. They have Oliver with them. There's the usual commentary about Oliver, not really worth talking about here. But they leave the circus and go back to the city, which is, like, has a big line of people waiting to enter into it. So we get a lot of occupation commentary about that. Reference is made multiple times to the Seanchan enforced lottery for horses, which is, I don't know why, I mean, I guess this is just our first major point of view that's been in Seanchan-occupied territory, which is why this is the first we're hearing of it. But then again, Matt is also a horse girl, so he would be very interested in it. And he notes that, like, their horses are safe, or at least his horse is safe, because, I don't know, Tylan got exemption for him or something.
Yeah, it is just, like, an interesting... It's one of those, like, realism details I do find really interesting. Like, the Seanchan could not... I mean, it's kind of funny because they bring other livestock, but they couldn't bring enough horses for their army over on their dumb little ships.
Yeah, so like that, we just gotta confiscate
So we just have
1/5 of the horses.
Yeah, we have to do a horse
And that's like, they pay for them, but I mean,
but
there
also,
goes
like,
your horse.
Yeah, especially if you're someone who relies on it, like, that is a very real consequence for you. And it's going to just, like, continue to be a plot point as they... spoiler, escape with the circus. They constantly are like, we're super worried that the Seanchan are going to come inspect our, like, horse tickets or whatever.
Yeah, because Valan Luca still has all their horses, which is one of Matt's reasons for wanting to leave with the circus, because they have that, like, mobility. And I can't remember why he still has all their horses. He just, like, put on a show or something and they really liked it.
Yeah, Valan Luca, I noted this in my blog anyway, says that he's got, a little bit of favor because he sheltered one of the Seanchan, like, elephant trainer women after the invasion at Falm.
Yeah. When we met her through Elena 90's point of view.
So she's still at the circus and has, I don't know, maybe joined back up with a Seanchan or something. So he's got like a little, I don't know if that is specifically why his horses are exempt or if he like bribed somebody, but he does note that as well.
Yeah.
That Valan Luca is in like very good favor with the Seanchan.
Well, yeah, which is also an interesting like thing to talk about under occupation and stuff like that. Because then Valan Luca is one of these people who is, I mean, he's being paid for it, so he doesn't really have the moral high ground here.
Yeah.
But he is aiding and abetting in a major escape attempt.
Yeah, for like, I don't want to give Valan Luca too much credit.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he's not, again, a moral character, but he is using his relative privilege to assist people who very much need to get out of the city.
Yeah. And it's like, we'll interact with other characters like that, including Satalanan coming up, who is sheltering Aes Sedai.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it is an interesting...
I just find this group of people, as annoying as many of them are individually, just a really interesting bunch.
Yeah, it is like an interesting little, well, actually quite large fellowship that we put together by the end of Winter's Heart. It's like 60 people plus the circus. Yeah.
So they return to the city and find the city incredibly crowded because the Seanchan return has finally here. So up until this point, it's just been the Forerunners or the military invasion. Mm-hmm. Now it's the colonists.
Yep.
So there are like, Matt notes a lady with like a wagon full of plants, you know, stuff like that. So Matt's return to the city obviously coincides with like Tuon's arrival by sea. And of course, we'll deal with that in a minute. But once they're in the city and realizing that this is happening, Beslin and Tom are, still talking about their little rebellion. This is when Matt is like, please, for the love of God, do not get all of us killed.
Yeah, Matt also notes that you shouldn't talk about these things in public because there's secret police.
Yeah. Guys.
You fucking idiots.
Like,
Beslin is a full-ass idiot throughout this entire plot.
Huge himbo, yeah.
Fucking moron. God bless him.
He's like, oh, but Matt's like, please take Oliver and go back. And Tom's like, please don't go try and look at the ships again. And Matt's like, I'm not gonna look at ships. God, leave me alone. But so Tom and Beslin and Oliver separate from Matt, who says that he's going to go like look for money by dicing. And we kind of have one of our infamous like Matt montage sequences where we're not given a lot of details of what he's doing, but presumably just dicing, hanging out, and wandering around the city, sort of noting how things are.
Yeah, being a real lowlife.
I don't know why we get so many montages from Matt. We're about to get one in the next couple of chapters, I can't remember, but...
Yeah, and there's just, like, Matt... They're so fascinating to me because Matt enters this such, like, liminal, hazy headspace.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what is up with this, like, dissociative state that you go into when you're gambling? I don't know. It's fascinating. Fascinating little weirdo.
But, like, when Matt regains consciousness, more or less, he's also getting... His leg is hurting more and more, and his hip. And he's finally like, ugh, I guess I have to return to the palace. So he starts making his way there through, like, gross alleys because the streets are all still so crowded. And Matt had a throwaway line here that I just wanted to comment on, which was that he referenced that he's hungry, so he needs to return to the palace, and he has, like, a little fantasy about all the foods that he's going to he might be served over at the Terracin Palace. And it just made me think of how Matt is a trickster figure, and I just read a book about this. This isn't my own thought, so don't think I'm breaking any ground here. But trickster figures in mythology are often motivated by appetites, especially hunger. We get a lot of Native American trickster mythology with, like, Coyote and Rabbit are hungry characters and are doing things with hunger. And, a lot of the types of trickster animals, like foxes, which Matt uses, are, like, hunger motivated.
Interesting.
So, I don't know. That's just something I'm going to be keeping an eye on as we are with Matt for the next little while. Not necessarily always his physical hunger, but, like, his sort of desire for things.
Yeah. Which
we referenced kind of jokingly about how he's constantly getting distracted by women, horses, and shiny things. But Matt is a very, like, greed-motivated character.
Yes.
Which I think is really interesting in showing how a greed-related character can also have moral standing.
Yeah, it's an interesting intersection. Usually, like, greed is associated with being very, very evil.
Mm-hmm. One of the 7 deadly sins, as it were. In
fact, Matt is extremely greedy, loves money, loves things, objects. But he is also, I think, one of our most moral, kind, and empathetic characters in his very bizarre way.
Yes.
So it is just a fascinating intersection of traits there.
Well, and it's also like an intersection of trickster traits. A lot of tricksters are motivated by hunger, but then also through their hunger motivations end up giving to the world.
Yes.
Tricksters are often related to, like, creation myths, especially Native American tricksters.
Yeah.
They'll end up, like, giving the world. Prometheus is classified as a trickster figure.
Stealing fire.
Yeah, thievery, tricking Zeus and the other gods into taking the worst portion of meat.
Get fucked.
Whatever.
Yeah.
So, like, tricksters give things to the world or to humanity, and I think Matt solidly occupies that position as well for giving people things.
Yes.
Whether that's freedom in the people that he is about to get out of Ebou Dar, or cannons, that's sort of his Prometheus moment. Although, you know, fire and destructive firepower are not exactly the same thing. But yeah, just something to keep an eye on. Anyway, as Matt is going through one of these alleys, he trips, and the golem, like, is immediately right next to him.
He's like,
and would have been right in front of him, with Matt able to react if Matt hadn't tripped.
Classic.
So yeah, classic Taviran moment. But the golem himself trips, because this is, in D&D terms, rough terrain.
Yeah.
With all the mud and whatnot. Which gives Matt enough time. He, like, yeets his walking stick at him, and then gets his fox head medallion out, the only thing that scares the golem.
Yeah.
And is doing his little twirly, rhythmic gymnastics routine with it.
Good for him.
Yeah,
I hope he gets all 10s.
Well, he gets up. And, so he and the golem are having this, like, extremely bizarre standoff.
Yeah.
Like, the golem trying to reach past the medallion. Meanwhile, Matt's just, like, frantically twirling his little heart out. When there's a voice that's like, come on, guys, he went into the alley, or da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
And the golem backs off, because he's like, and he says to Matt, like, my orders are to not attract attention, which is the only reason I'm not going to kill you right now.
Yeah.
And Matt's like, oh yeah, back the fuck off.
He's like, oh yeah? Aggressively twirls the medallion at him.
Yeah, and runs after the golem, just so he can watch the golem literally, like...
octopus-like. Yeah.
Yeah, squish into a small crevice and disappear. Yeah. And Matt's like, ugh. And, he's, like, staring after that when Noel just, like, pipes up right next to him. What the?
Yeah. I was like, what the fuck was that?
And Matt's just like, oh, hello.
And it's just the ugliest old man you've ever seen.
Yeah, and Matt notes that he looks familiar, and if you have recently read A Crown of Swords and made a special note of it while reading, Matt and Noel did have a very brief interaction in that book. Mm-hmm. It's kind of weird that Matt never figures out why Noel looks familiar, but there it is.
What do you do?
And he's like, oh, where are your friends? And Noel was like, oh, no, I don't I was just yelling.
I don't have friends.
I don't have friends. Are you kidding? So Noel was there playing his own trick. Noel is himself a trickster figure. Yes. As we will learn, he is in disguise throughout, which is another hallmark of trickster figures. And one of Matt's, for some reason, main character traits in the last 3 books, once Brandon Sanderson gets a hold of him, is that he loves disguises. I don't know why that.
Matt?
Yeah. I don't know why Brandon Sanderson brought that to the game, but it is archetypically correct.
Okay.
So, whatever. And Matt and Noel are just like, oh, hey. And Matt's like, what's happening? What are you doing here? And Noel's like, he's like, oh, are you new to the city? And Noel's like, no, I've been here for a while, but I got kicked out of my place because of all of the influx of Seanchan, so I was basically going to sleep in an alley tonight. And Matt's like, oh, well, I think I can do you one better. And will offer. And in the next chapter, we'll see him bring Noel to the Terracin Palace to integrate him into the Fellowship,
Matt
which is just great.
Picked up this old man off the street.
Yeah, this is literally the next few chapters are just Matt picking up various people, putting them in his pockets and carrying along.
Yep.
On his escape attempt.
Noel is definitely my favorite one that he picks up, I think.
Noel is great, yeah. I love him.
I love Noel. His, like, twice broken nose, and I love him.
Yeah, just an ugly man.
Just an ugly old man who's just always, like... Matt's always like, he just seems like he knows more than he's
And Noel's
saying.
like, I do.
Something seems shifty about this old man.
And he is.
But Noel's like, takes one to know one, you shifty little bitch.
But the framing narrative of these last couple of chapters is that the dice are rolling in Matt's head, and he is very concerned about what will happen when they stop. The last time we were with Matt and the dice stopped, a building fell on his head.
Yeah.
So his paranoia is understandable.
Yeah.
And he's like, they didn't even stop when the Golem attacked me. So what fresh hell could be in store for me now?
And it is a fresh hell.
Yeah. But the Golem coming back, by the way, is just like, the Golem's still in the city.
Yes, Golem is still in the city. It will play a crucial part in the climax of this book, though I don't know if we find that out until the next book.
The Golem is sort of the serial killer in the shadows, waiting. Which, at the beginning of Path of Daggers, everyone was really worried and stressed about. And I guess I should say in the end of Crown of Swords, too. And it's sort of interesting that Matt apparently hasn't been worried at all.
Yeah.
Although I guess maybe it was driven out of his mind by the building falling on top of his head. Plus, he no longer is as worried about protecting Elaine and Nynaeve.
Yeah.
They're obviously out of danger.
Yeah.
As far as the Golem is concerned. But since the Golem has this kind of vendetta against Matt, it is interesting that he doesn't just, come after Matt more forcefully, I guess, throughout the next few weeks, months, however long this montage is going to take.
Yeah, it's for some reason like it can't get into the Terracin Palace.
Yeah.
Except it does.
Except it does. Dude, you can squeeze through cracks in the wall. I think you can. He's like, I just don't want to attract notice. I'm like,
it's like, boo.
Boo.
Shut up, Moradin, or whoever gave you that dumb order.
Yeah, I can't remember. Samael? Moradin? It can't be Samael. Samael's dead. Moradin? Perhaps? Who knows?
Oh, Samael.
But anyway, that's our Matt updates.
Matt updates.
He's doing about as well as can be expected. Which is to say, pretty bad, but he's still alive.
Matt is going through it.
Our little survivalist boy. And we're going to be with him for the next several chapters.
Yep.
So
it's Matt time, baby.
Matt time, baby! Which unfortunately is also Tylan and 2 on time, as we've already referenced. But we will deal with that as it happens. Okay. Well, thanks to Glenna Mackenzie for our theme song. Thanks to our patrons on Patreon and our followers on social media.
Yeah, thank you guys. We love you a lot.
Do you have anything to add?
No, I think I've said enough.
Okay, do you have a sign-off?
Yes. Tonight, my mom is getting up at 3 a.m.
What?
To watch...
What?
watch
Oh, no.
BTS perform in Seoul, Korea. They are doing a performance, and she bought live streaming tickets, and the performance is obviously at like 7 a.m. Seoul time, which is like 3 a.m. or 2 a.m. So she's like, I don't know if I will, but I think I will. Which my mom loves.
Obsession with BTS is one of the highlights of my life.
I know, it's so funny. I also really like BTS, but my mom brings it to like a whole new level, and it's just like really funny how much she loves them. So everyone be thinking about my mom up at 3 a.m. watching BTS by herself.
Have a good week, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.